I think it's a confluence of factors. I think the markets bounced because there wasn't an acceleration of the trade war with President Xi in Argentina. But I think a lot of the markets are beginning to realize they're seeing a proper global slowdown. The Fed, I would argue, is still saying they're raising rates. I know everyone was exuberant that he was closer to neutral. But I think that we know there's a rate rise coming on the 19th. And I think with the cyclical sectors in the US, like housing, just going down the tubes at the moment, I think people are beginning to get very nervous about expectations for next year.
So even if the Fed was one and done with December, you're worried that that's too late?
Well, I don't think it's too late. I mean, I think they have a full economy. They have the concern, the Phillips curve, and wage inflation is coming any minute. I think we're all waiting for a pay rise at some point. But I think that the other way of thinking about this is I think the Fed is out of the way for the markets now, simply because if we're having a slowing economy, we're going to have lower earnings, and cutting interest rates doesn't solve anything for maybe the next couple of years. So we could in Q3 have seen peak earnings, and then I think from a global investor's perspective, the US at a market level is just the most expensive equity market in the world. And therefore, I think people are probably maybe moving more towards taking profits.
It's kind of amazing because it was only a week ago that Fed Chairman Powell was speaking and soothing the markets by what he was saying at that point. Then you had President Trump announcing that there had been progress made in China, and that seemed as if it removed the two biggest concerns overhanging the market. Here we are just a few days after all of that, and we are now thinking, even with all of that, we're really concerned about an economic slowdown.
Well, I think we are. I mean, it's been coming. I think I've been on your show and other parts of CNBC in the last couple of years wondering when this economic expansion in the US would start to slow down. I think that as an outsider, the delicious political interest that I have in the US from here on in is we know the president potentially wants to get re-elected in 2020. So he's not only going to start fighting the Fed, as he's already doing verbally at the moment, he's going to try and fight the economy. With a divided House, can he get a deal with the Congress to do an infrastructure package or a healthcare package that keeps the US economy going to improve his
even if he gets an infrastructure package going,
Sure.
An infrastructure package often takes 3, 4, 5 years, a decade to actually see the fruits of whatever plan you lay.
So does trade, but trade has been popular with his base, even though nothing has changed yet. I think it's
in the reverse.
Right. It's the message that he's doing something, and therefore he has something to campaign on, I would say.
You know, the one issue, though, is if he is concerned, because next year is when we really start thinking honestly about 2020 and what's going to happen with that election. That has a lot of people wondering if you are looking at a very brief window for these trade talks with China, or for the idea that you're either going to reach some mild agreement or pull back in if you're not getting what you want, because you are not going to want that additional weight on the economy.
I think that's true, although I would argue that the trade story is something that will take time to rebalance. And the one thought I'd leave for you for the first half of next year, not necessarily for the US economy, but for the global economies, everyone has front-run the president's tariffs. So economic activity in the second half of this year has been fine. I'm worried about next year when people knew the tariffs were going to be in place, and therefore they will have to, rebase their industrial production.
You think that people pulled forward already, and that you've already seen those results?
Yes, or we're seeing them at the moment, which is why the global economy still feels fine. Maybe when we get through the Chinese New Year in February, we're suddenly going to find out that actually Asian industrial production is 5 or 10% lower because they can't front-run the tariffs anymore, because the tariffs are in place. But the other thing is, I think, even if we think trade is a headline issue and an inconvenience issue, if you add up all the tariffs that the president's threatening to put on China, it's less than 1% of Chinese GDP. So, it really shouldn't make a lot of difference. And it's less than 0.5% of US GDP, so it shouldn't really make a difference. I think the concern I have now is what we're calling the emerging tech Cold War. Washington has decided to go up against China for the theft of intellectual property, for the abuse of business models in corporate America. And I think that's when Jack Ma talks about, this trade war lasting the next 20 years. I think it's about technology. It's not about trade.
Is it a fair and justified complaint, though? Is it something that he should be standing up and saying something?
I think he should be. I think the question is, at what point maybe Washington's decided that it's gone, past a red line.
I mean, that's my question. The market short term may want a quick solution to this and just get out. But longer term, what does our economy really need?
Well, I think longer term, we would all prefer, some type of continuity of the globalization we've enjoyed in the last 20 or 30 years. I think the Brexit vote, the increasing political fragmentation in Europe, the fragmentation we see in the US, tells me globalization's done for now. We're going to see business models no longer being able to arbitrage the lowest costs around the world. And therefore, I think that the tech Cold War makes sense for me, because we're going to see President Trump and the Washington system put pressure on people like Apple to bring jobs back to Minnesota, as an example. They don't want it assembled in Vietnam or in China anymore.